Hi yogis, welcome to my channel. My name is Kassandra, and in this video I wanted to go over my top 5 favorite yoga poses to build up core strength. So I actually got the idea for this video from one of you guys who reached out to me on Instagram, so thank you very much for that. I'm always looking for more recommendations, and I always want to make more videos that serve you. I know core strength is something that is absolutely crucial in yoga. I mean, it's really hard to progress in your practice unless you start to develop some abdominal strength, hip flexor strength, and also back strength. So I'm going to show you my top 5 favorite poses and moves that are going to help you develop that strength if you do them very regularly and consistently. And I'll also show you how to modify them, because some of them are, pretty challenging. So if you're a beginner, you might not be able to do the full thing. However, you can start a little bit, start off slow, and just build up over time. Pose number 1 is plank pose. There is just no avoiding this one, guys. Plank pose is probably one of the poses that I hated the most when I was first starting out, but it is just absolutely crucial. Let's look over what plank pose is, although I'm sure many of you have done it a million times before. Foundation is extremely important. Fingertips are spreading wide, palms are underneath the shoulders, and I'm stepping my legs out behind me. Common misalignments that happen in plank pose are the pelvis drops. If the abdominals are not yet strong enough, this will happen. Another thing, if you're a little bit weaker in the abdominals, or if you're just being a little bit lazy, you might also lift your bum up high in the air, almost as if you were doing a down dog. So I usually like to imagine that if I had something like a little bead at the crown of my head, I would want it to roll all the way down and off of my heels. I also like to draw the low belly into the low back. And Megan Curry says this cue that I think is really great. I've heard her say, magnetize pubic bone to sternum. So it's like you're trying to zip the pubic bone to the sternum in together. Another way to think about this is that you're lengthening your tailbone towards your heels and then drawing the lower belly in. What's important is that I'm also pushing into the fingertips and knuckles, and I'm broadening my shoulder blades behind my back. Guys, doing this for even just 1 minute every single day, you will build some serious strength in no time. If you need to modify, simple, you just drop your knees down to the mat. This is another one that people kind of cheat. They either drop their hips down and it's almost like a back bend, or they're almost like in a tabletop pose and nothing's really gonna happen. So it's perfectly fine to be down on your knees. I hate calling this girl push-ups, by the way. We are not going to call this in my channel. Hips move forward, diagonal line from the crown of your head all the way down to the tailbone and all the way down to the knees. Imagine you're squeezing a beach ball in between your upper arms, and you should start to feel the burn in no time. Finally, one last way that you can modify is to do a forearm plank. I know for a lot of people, especially when you're just starting off, it's a lot for your wrists and fingers. I have a really great short sequence on my channel to help you get rid of any pain in your wrists and fingers. I'll link that down below. But if you're still, or even if you're working with an injury, doing forearm plank is just as effective. It's also very challenging. So you want to have your forearms down to the mat. I like to be able to reach and catch a hold of the biceps, like really grab a hold of them. And then you can plant your palms down, step the feet back, same thing. Lengthen the tailbone back to the heels, spread the shoulder blades wide, draw the navel in. If you need to modify, you can drop your knees down on the mat, same thing. So plank pose is our first one. Pose number 2, I hate to say it, it's another plank pose. However, it is side plank. And this is amazing at targeting your obliques, especially if you're gonna start to work on some arm balances or some trickier transitions. You're really gonna wanna be able to connect to your obliques on a deep, strong level. Side planks is one of the best ways that you can learn to do that. So my favorite way to transition or to get into side plank is from a regular plank. So let's say you're in your plank pose. We'll start with the feet hip width distance apart. Lots of different ways that you can do that. Let's say, for example, first way, you can drop both heels over to the right, lean on your right hand, and extend your left arm up. You can also just keep your left hand onto your hip. So same misalignments that can happen in regular plank can happen in a side plank. We do not want the pelvis to be dipping down, and we do not want it lifted all the way up with our knees bent. Nothing is really happening if you're doing that. Try to stay straight as much as you can. If it's challenging, put more distance between each foot. If you want to make it harder, you're going to stack your top leg on top of the other. You can reach your arm up. You can even lift that top leg up. When people get pretty comfortable in side plank, and myself included, I'm guilty of this, what tends to happen is our top hip bone starts to rotate back and we end up facing over towards the sky and towards the ceiling. So try to keep that top hip bone directly facing off to the side. It's gonna make it a little bit harder. If you need to modify this one, simply drop your bottom knee. This is a great way to start working on your side plank pose. So you want to have your right hand, your right knee, and your left foot all in one long line. You're pushing directly into both, and once you start to feel a little bit more stable, you can start to float the back leg up. It's going to work your glutes a lot, but it's also going to start working and getting into your obliques. Now the same options apply, guys. You can do this on your forearms. So if you have some wrist injuries, just roll onto your right forearm and there you have it. Pose number 3 is not actually a pose, it's more of a transition or a move, but it's something I do very often, especially in my vinyasa flow classes. I usually call it knee to nose or knee to elbow or knee to shoulder. I've heard it called stoke the fire, but basically what it is from down dog, you lift your right leg up to the sky, and then as you exhale, you shift forward into plank pose and see if you can tap your knee to your nose. So just like in plank, my hips are not high up as if I was in down dog, and I'm not dropping so that my shin is touching the mat. I'm trying to keep my hips fairly low, and I'm trying to close the gap between the thigh and my belly, and then I'm trying to coil in. Now, if this is quite challenging, you can do it from your tabletop pose instead. I do this a lot in my beginner classes. Actually, I do this a lot in many yoga classes. So from a tabletop pose, same thing. Right leg would extend up and back. And then as you exhale, you would contract and pull your knee to your nose, trying to close the gap between your thigh and the belly. So the reason I love this movement so much is that it's a great way to target the lower abdominals, but also especially the deep hip flexors, deep into the psoas. Hip flexor strength is something that not a lot of people seem to focus on, but I'm a stickler for it because once I started really developing on strengthening my hip flexors, the rest of my practice saw a lot of evolution pretty rapidly. Another reason why I love this one is that you can do it whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced student alike. So it's great for absolutely all experience levels. Pose number 4 is boat pose. Now, boat pose was probably the one that I disliked the most when I was first starting my yoga practice because I was just honestly terrible at it. So now I actually do like it. This is another one that requires quite a bit of hip flexor strength, but it's a full core builder. So it's going to work the erectors, the muscles along the spine, the abdominals, the lower abdominals, and deep into the hip flexors as well. So let's go over boat pose. You want to start sitting on your sit bones, and I usually like to begin by holding onto the backs of the thighs, especially if you're more of a beginner student. And then you rock back, slide the toes back, and see if you can just start lifting the toes off of the mat. What tends to happen in boat pose with students is that they contract in and fold. Instead, we want to think of lifting the heart up to the sky. So in my classes, I usually like to tell people, imagine you have a string around your heart and it's being pulled and lifted up. So we're drawing the shoulder blades down the back and lifting up from the chest, drawing the low belly in. Once you have that, you can rock a little bit further and see if you can lift one shin or one foot and then the other foot off the mat. So this is probably the easiest way to go about it, holding onto the hamstrings and keeping your shins parallel to the floor, focusing on lifting the chest. If you'd like to progress a little further, you can reach your arms forward towards the heels. If you'd like to go further still, you can straighten your legs, and if you'd like to go even further than that, you can extend your arms up overhead. So even for me, this is so intense, but oh my goodness, you are going to feel it in your legs, in your abdominals, in your back, in your shoulders. It works your entire body. So this is boat pose. Another variation that you can do is low boat, or some people call it banana pose, other people call it hollow pose. They're all the same thing basically. So from your boat pose, you would just lower so that your lower back comes in contact with the floor. And this is the most important thing about this pose. So if your legs are out, your arms are out, my lower back is pressing down into the mat, and I'm roughly trying to keep my head at the same height as my toes and as my feet. You make it easier by reaching your hands towards your heels. You make it harder by reaching your arms up overhead. You can also make this easier by bending your knees. So if I keep my knees directly over my hips and my shins parallel to the mat, I'm still pushing my lower back into the mat and drawing the navel in towards the low back. And I can do the same thing. I can reach my arms forward, or I can reach my arms up overhead. Trying to hold this pose for 10 seconds at first, and then making your way up to 30, making your way up to 60 seconds. If you do that every single day, you are going to start to see a lot of improvement in your core strength. It really doesn't take long for this one to start working your body in really intense ways. So the fifth and final pose is one that I like to just call the pickup pose, because that's all you're trying to do is pick yourself up off the ground. Now, I am here in beautiful Costa Rica. I do not have blocks with me, but you could do this with 2 blocks to make it a little bit easier, but I'll just show you how I do the pose, and then you can choose to maybe practice it with blocks at home if you prefer. So starting seated just like I am, you want to start by bringing your knees as close to your chest as you possibly can, crossing one ankle in front of the other. And then you're planting your palms beside you, beside the hips, fingertips spreading wide. Really important that you have a strong foundation in the fingertips here. So this shape that you're trying to create is basically what you're going to want to try and hold once you're lifting yourself up off the ground. First thing that wants to happen is, honestly, if you even just try this right now, you're gonna feel hip flexor strength and core strength engage. It's hard to keep our knees really close in towards us, but that's why it improves our core strength. So if you plant your hands beside the hips and you bring your knees in real close, you want to push your palms into the floor to lift your bum off the ground. Keep your toes at first, and once you're here, you can hang out and stay as you are, or you can lift one foot off the mat, or maybe the other foot. And this is the pickup pose, and you're trying to stay here pretty much as long as you possibly can. Now, the most common complaint I get from students when they try to do this pose is they say that their arms are too short. And I mean, maybe your arms are too short, but to be honest, I have yet to meet a student in person whose arms were actually too short to produce this pose. Usually people feel that way because they are unable to they don't have enough core strength just yet to be able to keep their knees and make that tiny little ball in order to be able to push and extend. However, if you do feel like my arms are too short, there's no way I can lift my bum up off the floor, then you would use 2 blocks, and you just literally put 1 block under each hand, and then you push into the blocks in order to give yourself a little bit more height. It'll be easier for you to lift your bum off the mat and then your heels off the ground. If that first variation feels pretty good, you can progress by extending the legs forward. So I'll start with the other ankle crossed on top. I'm squeezing my legs and my thighs into the belly, planting my palms beside me, pushing the hands into the ground, lifting the bum up first, one leg, then the other, and you can hold here, or you can practice extending. So it's a lot harder. I'm trying to contract and then lower. So I'm not trying to lean back, I'm trying to close the gap and get really small. So there's a big contraction in the abdominals, big contraction in the hip flexors. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm telling you, if you do even just one of these poses every single day, persistently, so over a couple weeks, over a couple months, you will absolutely start to see some benefits. You will start to feel your core get a lot stronger, and it's gonna show up in the rest of your yoga practice. So your movements are gonna be a little bit more fluid, your transitions will be a little easier, and maybe you'll be able to work your way up into some arm balances and inversions. The key with all of this is to be really compassionate and really patient with yourself. These things take time. I know for me, it took me a really long time to develop core strength and any kind of strength, really. I was really weak when I first started doing yoga. So be kind to yourself and keep practicing every day. Even if it's just doing plank pose every day for 30 seconds or doing the knee to nose a couple times a day, you will start to see improvements. If you'd really like to turbocharge your core strength, I have a couple of great short classes here on my channel. So I have a 10-minute plank pose challenge, which is really fun, and I encourage you to try it out. And I also have like a hit circuit, like a fitness class that's like 15 minutes long, I think, and that's all about core strength, and that one is amazing. Even if you were just to do it like twice a week, you would definitely start to see some improvements. Thank you so much for doing this video with me. If you don't already subscribe to my channel, please do so. I put out a new full-length yoga class every single Thursday. Have a wonderful day. Namaste.